Right, you know I generally like to try and avoid transfer rumour videos, but this link has piqued my interest a little bit because if this one is true, I think it could potentially give us an idea as to where we're going tactically under Eddie Howe, and I'll explain why. Now, really quickly, before we delve deeper into that topic, I just want to say sorry that the uploads haven't been as consistent as they usually would be. The reality is there hasn't been that much to talk about, as we all know. The window's been pretty quiet, and unless you've been one of the clubs that seem to be completely exempt from PSR, the clubs that have been managing to get all their deals done before everyone else gets a chance to even look at players, unless you're one of them, then it's just been pretty much nothing going on. And obviously, a lot of the other content creators have been making videos that would be kind of right up my street of making videos about how Isak isn't going to Liverpool. However, I did that video like over a month ago now, so I'm not just going to repeat myself. I already made that case for why I think he's going nowhere, and my argument's only strengthened since then. But if you are new here and you haven't seen that video before and you do want to see why over a month ago I was saying Isak is going nowhere, then stick around to the end of the video because there'll be a link at the end of the video to that video. But for now, Giorgio Scalvini, young Italian centre-back for Atalanta, not Inter Milan. The rumours seem to have started from some random in-the-know kind of person on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it. And as I've said before, I take the majority of what these in-the-knows say on Twitter, X, the majority of what they say I take with a pinch of salt. So the reality is this also could more than likely not be true. I think it's at a point now where even Fabrizio Romano, one that was generally always quite reliable, even he now seems a bit like a PR mouthpiece at the moment. Half of his tweets sound like they're literally just dictated by agents. But still, this link, and I'm going to leave it as just a link at the moment, has caught my attention a little bit. I don't see this one in the same light as I did Matteo Cunha, that was a no-go from the start for many reasons, because Scalvini ticks a lot of boxes. And tactically, I think he ticks a lot of boxes that a lot of us haven't actually thought about yet. And when I looked more into Scalvini as a player, it became quite apparent to me some of the things we saw towards the end of last season and Scalvini's strengths and how they might come together to give us an indication as to where we could be going tactically. So I'll get into that later on. But first, the reason why this link has stood out to me at all in the first place, because a few weeks back when everyone was panicking and been fighting about the lack of signings and how we're not going to sign anyone and all that crap, I decided to sort of fully nerd out and just start researching players around Europe to see if I could find anyone who I thought might fit our recruitment profile. Because despite the most likely targets that we were linked to being Gahey, Trafford, Elanga, João Pedro, I thought to myself, a lot of the time we never really know the players we're going to sign before we sign them. So I thought to myself, I wouldn't really be too surprised to see a surprise signing from somewhere in Europe, like a club, a player that we just haven't considered, sort of in a similar vein to how Tonali just sort of came out of nowhere. So as I said, I was looking into the positions that we need players, so right wing, striker, centre back and goalkeeper, but I was looking mainly at centre back. And I'll be honest, I didn't come across Scalvini, but I did notice a player called Matteo Gabbia, another Italian, tall, composed centre back from AC Milan. And I looked into everything. It seemed a somewhat plausible transfer. He seems a good tactical fit. He's 25, fairly tall, and considering once we replace Schär, our back four would be whoever we replace him with, then Botman, Hall and Tino. And they're all young and not the most aerially threatening. And that's before we potentially replace Pope with Trafford, which really doesn't solve that young and not aerially threatening problem. But then also, as I was reading up on Gabbia, obviously him being Italian, naturally, as a Newcastle fan, someone mentions Italy, I think about Tonali. It's probably an unhealthy obsession at this point that I can't think about Moretti or Spaghetti and not think about Tonali volleying it in against Man United or screaming it in from outside on the wing against Brentford. But regardless, that's happening and I need to learn to deal with it. But it made me think that realistically, we're building a team around that midfield partnership of Bruno and Tonali. So obviously, as I said, when I was looking at Gabbia, he had a lot of strengths as to why we might potentially sign him, but then also not least the fact he's Italian. But then there is one kind of valid criticism that Italian players get in the Premier League, and it's generally that none of them ever particularly do that well in the Premier League, or the majority of them don't, not none of them, the majority don't. But then if we look at the numbers, there's been 80 outfield Italian players that have made an appearance in the Premier League, and only 21 of them were defenders. And I'm going to go out on a whim here and say if you were building a World 11 based off of sort of like national stereotypes and like where that nation is good at things in football, you'd probably go Brazilian attack, Spanish midfield, Italian defence. I could be wrong. Let me know in the comments. I'm sure some people will have some different opinions on that one. But the point being that generally Italian football is known for defending. And while even there has been some defensive Italian flops in the Premier League, there's also been some that haven't been that bad. I mean, Santon for us wasn't particularly awful, especially considering the calibre of player that we could attract at the time. Calafiori looks class for Arsenal. But there not being a lot of examples of really good Italian defenders in the Premier League wasn't where this deal kind of fell down for me for Gabbia. It was more that he's seen as a key part of AC Milan's future, and it seems that a deal for him would be very difficult to do, probably potentially more difficult than the Gahey deal, and we all know how that panned out. So that brings us back to Scalvini, who has actually been linked. And again, take it with a pinch of salt. It could be another Barella smokescreen, and then we go sign Tonali. Maybe this time Gabbia is the Tonali, who knows? But Scalvini is interesting because he's not just a like-for-like replacement for Schär. He's more than a like-for-like replacement. When you look at a player like Gahey, who we've been linked to absolutely no end, he's very similar to Schär, and he would play a very similar role to what Schär's been playing in a back four. But a few things have happened over sort of the past couple of years, but then even more so towards the end of last season, that might have changed the player profile that we're looking for, where we don't just want someone to be a like-for-like replacement for Schär, but to also potentially be able to morph into a different tactical setup. And the things that happened over the past sort of couple of years are, we qualified for Champions League by doing more running than anyone else in the league. And then we tried to carry on doing that much running in Europe, ended up with 3 goalkeepers on the bench. So now we're having to try and find different ways to manage intensity and avoid injuries. And obviously we hired James Bunce largely for that reason. The second thing is Dan Burn went from makeshift left back to absolute god amongst men at centre back. And then obviously the third thing, and this is the thing that we kind of all know, as handsome as he is, Fabian Schär is getting to the age where he's spending less time running and more time pointing. So as I said, the initial plan looked like it was to bring in a long-term replacement for Fabian Schär, someone who could lock down that right centre-back spot for the next sort of 5 to 7 years. And Scalvini fits that brief. He's 21, but he does more than that, because when we play our usual 4-3-3 that we've played pretty much the whole time under Eddie, it's built around high intensity pressing and winning the ball back high up the field. But when we get tired, or when teams can keep the ball, that setup becomes quite vulnerable. But then we found a workaround, a way that we could sort of recover, not put as much intensity onto the players. And that all culminated into, if you cast your mind back to the second to last home game last season against Chelsea, Eddie did something that we thought he didn't potentially know how to do, and that was change the formation. Obviously we know he does know how to. It happened a lot of times during game, but this was the first time I think we'd ever seen the team sheet come out with a different formation. And that's because Botman was back, Burn was undroppable, so Botman couldn't just come in to replace Burn, and then Schär and Burn were given a sort of unique instruction to step up into midfield when the ball was on their side of the pitch. So when the ball was passed side to side across the Chelsea's back line, when it hit the left centre-back, Schär would push up into the midfield, and that meant that as soon as the ball was played forward, any sort of progressive pass, Schär was then doubling up in that spot so that no one could kind of find any options, and he would just come into dead end after dead end. And then alternatively, when the ball switched over to the right side of the pitch, so Chelsea's right centre-back, Dan Burn would push up from here into the midfield, again to cut out any progressive forward passing from the right side of Chelsea's defence, meaning that basically no matter which side Chelsea were on, every time they pushed the ball forward from their defence, there was someone there to meet it pretty much every time. You essentially had 2 centre-backs that were also moonlighting as sort of CDMs, and Chelsea had absolutely no clue what to do with it. It went from kind of how they'd been all season, comfortably keeping possession and always managing to find a spare player and progress up the pitch, to, as I said, just running into dead end after dead end after dead end. You saw Cole Palmer just looking around like, lads, I don't know what to do. And then obviously Jackson eventually got that frustrated. He went to go elbow Botman in the head. And this is where the potential of Scalvini becomes very interesting, because that role he is built for. He's played centre defensive mid before in his career. He's very composed under pressure, which when a centre back has stepped up into midfield, if they receive the ball, you need someone who's good in them high pressure situations. He's excellent at defending on transition. So if he's ever stepped up a bit too far, caught out of position, he knows exactly what to do and where to be, and just knows exactly how to recover from that position. He carries the ball out well, again, like Schär, but whereas Schär likes to ping long diagonals, Scalvini tends to just drive the ball forward and keep it more simple. And Schär can do that as well. But Schär is more of like a deep lying distributor. As I said, pinging long balls to Gordon, Isak maybe, you know, we've seen it to Joe Linton a few times. Whereas Scalvini's sort of a bit more like, imagine if you took Joe Linton's strengths but put them into a competent centre-back, which to be honest feels a little bit harsh on Joe Linton, because I think it was against City he stepped into a left centre-back role and he absolutely bossed the game. But I wouldn't be one sat here saying, oh, let's just put Joe Linton at a centre-back. So the point is, Scalvini is similar to Joe Linton in that he's going to sort of take the ball with physicality and then sort of drive the ball up the field a little bit, again using physicality and a sort of composure and ability to get out of sticky situations. But less so like Schär, not pinging long diagonals, and again, more like Joe Linton sort of. So I think if Scalvini is the target, I think next season we could see more rotation into a 3 or a 5 back. I don't think it'll be every game. I think we will still stick with the 4-3-3 in a lot of games, but having that ability to swap formation into a 3-back or a 5-back just gives Eddie extra options in terms of rotating the team, managing minutes, managing fitness, all that kind of stuff. In that sort of 3/5-back, we'd have obviously Tino and Hall out on the width, and this is where João Pedro and even Elanga can potentially come into it, because we could be moving more into a system where Tino and Hall are the width, and then instead of having out-and-out attackers who kind of sit in a left wing or right wing position, we'd have potentially 3 sort of attackers who rotate and drift around position in sort of Isak, Gordon, João Pedro and even Elanga, where they're all capable attackers of being quite fluid across the front 3. So as I said, instead of Murphy or Gordon just hugging the touchline, as an attack starts to shape up, you could have João Pedro maybe start to drift out and go and support Hall on the left side, then Gordon sort of slots in into like maybe like a 10 sort of role. Obviously that's one of Isak's strengths, is being able to kind of play anywhere across the front 3. If we look at Elanga as well, that's what he's been doing at Forest all season, is just sort of popping up anywhere across the front 3. And what that does is it just makes your attack become a lot less predictable, and it just becomes much more dynamic and free flowing. You know, the opposition right back isn't just going to be trying to weigh up all game how to stop Anthony Gordon. You know, they essentially won't know who's going to be coming up against them next. Whereas obviously in training, we will spend all week working on who should drop when, who should press when, who should drift when. So our team will know exactly where everyone's going to be, when they're going to be, where they're going to be. But the opposition, it'll just be so much more unpredictable for them. But that is all if we go down that path. So let me know what you think. Do you think we're going to go towards potentially more of that 3-5-back-ish shape next season? Is Scalvini a smokescreen, or is he potentially the real deal? Let me know in the comments, because I'm genuinely curious to where everyone's heads have kind of gone with, obviously, like, there's been, you know, everyone's on holiday, the players, the Eddie Howe, everyone's on holiday, so we're not really hearing anything sort of credible from the club. So at this point, everyone is just kind of speculating a little bit, and I want to know where everyone's heads are with things and what everyone thinks is going on, and that's where my head's gone anyway. I think we might be potentially working on going towards a 3/5-back and a more dynamic attacking setup. If you've enjoyed the video, please smash the like button. Remember to subscribe, hit the bell. Obviously we're nearly there now. We've nearly got through the PSR window thing, so we now can potentially start to see all the big news come in, hopefully. So you don't want to miss out on that, because as I said, I generally don't do much talking about transfer rumours unless, as I said in this video, it's got a bit more, I think, to it. So if you hit the bell, you know when I'm posting about a player, generally 95% of the time it's going to be because we've actually signed the player. I've seen him in Greg's with a 4-pack of yum-yums. I want to come on here and tell you all about it. But anyway, thank you for watching. Hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll see you on the next one.